The third thing I decided to learn to cook. I've lived off ready meals and toast for far too long, and I thought I've got a nice kitchen now, maybe I should learn to cook. And I'm learning, it's going quite well. I don't always know the right words for things. I couldn't remember the word marinate recently when I was trying to describe a recipe to my friend that I'd had a go of. I said, look, then you get the chicken, it's dead straightforward. Get the chicken, you put some olive oil on it. Then you get some lemon thyme, you put that in with it, and you cover it and leave it in the fridge overnight to fester. But I was in a cafe a few months ago with one of my friends. She's the sort of person who prefers savoury over sweet. I don't really know why we're still friends. She's nice enough. She ordered a carrot cake, and I always think a carrot cake is such an abomination of a cake. It's like, it's got veg in it. Fuck off. Some people choose to put dates and nuts in it. You're just removing all of the cake aspects. What you've got there is a shitty pasty. So she ordered a carrot cake, I ordered a slice of strawberry cheesecake. On top of her carrot cake was some icing and then a slither of something orange-coloured for decoration, I suppose. And I said to her, is that a bit of carrot? Fair assumption of being carrot cake. And she had a little nibble of it and she went, no, it's not carrot. I said, is it orange then? She said, no, it's not orange. I said, well, I'm all out of orange-coloured things. Unless it's the tail of a goldfish, I've got no idea. She had another nibble of it and she said, I think it's apricot. I said, oh, I can't have apricot. She said, why not? I said, I'm allergic to it. She said, ooh, what happens to you? I said, ooh, I get the shits. And she said, is it really bad? I said, oh, yeah, it was like a chocolate fountain down there. And she said, was that just off one? I said, no, I had a bag of them. She said, how many was in the bag? I said, I don't know, maybe 40. And it was only as I was telling her that I realised I'm not allergic to apricots. I'm allergic to 40 apricots. But I was on holiday with my sister last year, and I don't get to see my sister often enough, and it was lovely to have a week together, just the two of us. It was really nice. And at the end of the week, she said something to me that I'll always hold dear. She said, it wasn't until I spent a week with you that I realised how many meals you can have in a day. Because she had mistakenly thought that you had breakfast and lunch, or you had brunch. No. Breakfast, brunch, 11's lunch. Afternoon tea, proper tea, dinner, supper. 11's. And then a midnight snack that can last anything up to 8 hours. And a Milky Way whenever the fuck you like. But I've got a friend who's really good at cooking and baking, and I was on the phone to her, she was showing off a little bit. She knows some random food facts, and she said, did you know that sugar is a preservative? I said, ooh, I'll live forever then. She said, no, you'll probably die quite young, but you won't go off for ages. But she said to me, if you want to learn to cook, why don't I just come and stay for the weekend and I'll teach you some basics? And I thought, actually, it's a really good idea. She said, do you mind if before I come, if I email you a list of things I think you should have in your store cupboard? I've never called it my store cupboard in my life. It's always been the bean cupboard, because that's where I keep me tins of beans. But I was a good girl. I got everything in that she suggested. I ordered it online. I'd never ordered food online for delivery before. If you've never done it, give it a go. It's amazing. I typed it into a computer, and a man brought it to the house. Some of you are looking at me like, fuck off, it's real. Typed it into a computer, somehow a fella got the message, who had a van and some food, and he brought it. You're not taking it seriously enough. A man brought food to my house. It was like being in a restaurant, but I didn't have to have a bra on. Bit like Nando's then. But we're clearly not married. Give us a cheer if you are married. Yay. And if you're not? Yay. More energy again. Have we got any divorcees in? Yay. Yay. Fucking the happiest of all, been there, done that, fucked it off. Now I'm divorced. And when I got divorced, it came as quite a surprise to me. Probably, no, surprised is probably the wrong word, isn't it? Shock's probably a better word. Surprised just sounds like he burst out of a big cake. It would have been better had he done that, because at least then there would have been fucking cake. But for a while after getting divorced, I found I wasn't invited to quite as many weddings, and I think people thought I was going to walk in like the bitter divorcee and go, you enjoy your fucking day. See how long this bastard lasts. But I've recently been invited to more weddings, and I went to one a few months ago and it was lovely. And instead of having a wedding cake, they had a spiral cake stand that had cupcakes all the way around and a massive cupcake on the top that I sort of had my eye on. But I suspected maybe one of the wedding party had claimed that as well. But the groom came over to me and he said, thanks for the recommendation, because I'd recommended the cupcake shop. That's a scary day when you realise you've just recommended a cupcake shop and you don't even live in that fucking town. And he said, thanks for the recommendation. I know you want a cake. What we're going to do, the band's going to come in a minute. The band's going to do 2 sections. In their break, that's when we're going to do cake stuff. I said, brilliant. So pretty much every time the band looked like they were come to the end of a song, I just stood up. And when I was eventually right, I went over to the cake stand, I picked a cake, my boyfriend was behind me, he did the same, my friend's wife, 4 of us picked our cakes, went back to our seats, smug as fuck that we'd missed the queue. Glanced across expecting to see a long line of people. The only people that were there were the bride and groom having their photos taken at the cake stand. The groom came over later and I said, I'm really sorry, but I think we might have jumped the gun on the cakes. And he said, don't worry, when I put the photos up on Facebook, I'm going to tag every gap with your fucking name. But I am trying to eat more healthily. I am trying. I went to the supermarket recently with my friend and we wanted to get some crisps. And we wanted to get the proper size bags, you know, not like the little ones that you get for when Bane's around. You know what I mean? Like the proper adult bags, you know, the ones that you've got to empty into a bowl that you'd normally mix things in. My friend spotted that there was an offer on and she wanted Doritos and I wanted Sensations because I'm a bit posher than she is. And but the 2-for-1 offer didn't go across brands and we were quite sad by that. And she said, you know what we should do? We should just get 2 bags of each. And I grabbed her hand and I went, you know what? Sometimes you've just got to let these offers go. But I am trying to eat more healthily. I had an apple. Thank you. It's a couple of months ago. I put it in my handbag on an optimistic Monday. And by the Thursday, there weren't any Kit Kats left. And I was hungry and I thought, I'm going to have to find this bloody apple. So I rooted around in my bag and I found it. It was prematurely bruised and battered because it had been in my bag for so long. And it had pen on it. But I was starving. So I peeled off the clean panty liner and I ate it. And it was all right. Who knew apples were all right? It reminded me of something I hadn't had for years that I really liked. And I was like, what does it remind me of? And I remembered it was toffee apples. Only a few weeks ago, my fella said to me, he said, your day-to-day is busier than mine. He said, do you want me to go and do a quick food shop? And I said, oh, that would be amazing. Thanks very much. I said, I'm only here for a couple of days, so don't get loads in. He said, just give us a list. So I said, great. So I made him a list, off he went. When he came back in, he said, I managed to get everything off the list apart from one thing. I said, that's great. Thanks very much. I started to unpack the bags, put them in the cupboard. And I said, what was the thing you didn't manage to get? He said, I didn't manage to get you any avocados. I said, oh, that's all right, don't worry about that. He said, so I bought you some pork pies instead. I said, I wish you worked for Tesco Home Delivery. We've run out of celery, so we've given you a Swiss roll. But he said the best thing about them, he said, they're whoops pork pies. I said, I don't know what that means. He said, they're whoops pork pies. He said, they're going to run out. We'll have to eat all 6 of them before we go to bed. Yes! But you know those cookie shops on the high street where you can get the normal sized cookies, but you can also get the bigger sort of celebration ones? He bought me one of those, celebration one, a few years ago for part of my Christmas present, and it was smashing. I was unexpected, it was great. And I opened the box and I said, this is a great present, this is excellent. He said, oh, I'm glad you like it. It was all iced Merry Christmas, Sarah with kisses on. He said, I'm glad you like it. He said, there's only one drawback. And I'm looking at a cookie that's bigger than me head, thinking there's no fucking drawback. He said, there's only one drawback, it only lasts 5 days. I said, it's like you don't know me at all. He said, you didn't let me finish, it only lasts 5 days, and I bought it 4 days ago. I said, stop your fucking chatting and get the kettle on then. So that's not a present, love, that's a challenge.
Thanks for watching. You know what would be great is if you liked and subscribed. I'm so needy, I'm so sorry. And why not come and see me live? And the tickets are available at sarahmillican.co.uk. Put the kettle on and settle in.